My name is Natalie Grayson, and my husband told me to get out of the rental at Love Field 45 minutes before my flight. Kept driving. He left with both suitcases in the trunk and that flat voice he used when he wanted cruelty to sound like discipline, like I had earned it. I stood on the curb in the cold, pressed stop on the recording in my coat pocket, and felt the square mason had slipped me. Before conference, my brother had folded the note into my hand and told me, "If he starts punishing you in public, don't argue. Garage C." So I didn't call after SUV disappeared into traffic. I turned toward the parking garage instead because the note in my pocket was not hope. It was instructions, written in Mason's block handwriting on hotel stationery. If he does it, record everything. Level 3. Short-term parking. Engine running. Already waiting. By the time I reached the garage doors, I knew Gavin thought he was teaching me consequences, and I knew he had completely misread me. For 7 months, I had been building a file on him, and the missing piece was proof he still believed fear would make me smaller. What Gavin did not know, as I walked toward Garage C with his voice on my phone, was that he had just become Dana Whitaker's last exhibit. Before I became the woman standing outside an airport with a recording in her pocket, I had been the kind of wife Gavin found useful in quieter rooms. I used to run grants compliance for a nonprofit arts network in Austin, and I was good with budgets, deadlines, language, and risk. Gavin never asked me to quit all at once because that would have sounded controlling, so he framed it as concern and called my work stress. He told me our marriage needed less friction, less edge, less of what he called my instinct to interrogate every detail, and I started mistaking surrender for maturity. The first things I gave up were late meetings, then travel, then my office, and after that came the smaller losses that never looked serious alone. I answered his clients from my phone, sent his thank you notes, tracked his calendar, remembered birthdays, softened his moods before dinners, and signed papers he set down beside me. By the 4th year, Gavin had trained our life into something efficient enough that even I could miss what was happening while it happened. The evidence was ordinary, which made it worse. My old work laptop boxed in storage, my name under his RSVPs, my initials on renewal packets. He liked to tell people I had chosen peace, and for a long time I helped him tell that story because I had forgotten that silence was part of the design. By Saturday night, the conference had settled into the polished rhythm Gavin loved, where donors laughed too loudly, vendor badges opened quiet doors, and everyone pretended money was culture. Tessa Vale moved through that ballroom like she belonged to his operation instead of orbiting it, adjusting seating cards, redirecting staff, and touching his sleeve too easily. I stayed where Gavin liked me best, smiling on cue, until Brooke Harlan from a Houston Arts Foundation mentioned the compliance packet I had supposedly signed. I turned toward her and kept my voice light enough to pass for curiosity when I asked which packet she meant, because I had signed nothing for her foundation. Brooke looked briefly confused, then named a vendor certification tied to one of Gavin's installation contracts, and that was the moment everything sharpened. Gavin's hand closed around my elbow before she finished the sentence, and the pressure in his grip told me more than his face ever would. He steered me out of the ballroom, through the corridor, into the elevator, already angry in the controlled way he preferred when other people were still nearby. Once the doors closed, he leaned in and told me I had embarrassed him, that I did not understand business, that I always ruined timing. I let the phone keep recording inside my clutch, watched the floor numbers rise, and knew Brooke's single sentence had just touched something Gavin had been hiding behind my name. By morning, Gavin had returned to the version of himself other people trusted, the one who ordered my coffee, checked us out, and thanked the valet like nothing had shifted. He carried our weekend forward with that polished ease until we reached the departure lane, then locked the doors, looked straight ahead, and told me to get out. When I did not move quickly enough, He added that I needed to learn what being on my own actually felt like. And the phone in my coat kept recording. I looked once toward the back of the SUV where both suitcases were still in the trunk. My boarding pass, still inside the leather folder I had packed. Gavin followed my eyes and told me that consequences were not supposed to be comfortable. Then reminded me my flight left in 45 minutes. I opened the door, stepped into the wind, and heard him give me one last instruction through the lowered window. Figure it out. Natalie. Before he pulled away. I watched the brake lights disappear and felt the folded note press against my palm inside my pocket. The paper already soft from how often I had checked for it. Mason had written only what mattered. Garage C. Level 3. Don't call. And for the first time that morning, Gavin was no longer controlling the sequence. By the time I crossed toward short-term parking with his voice stored on my phone and both bags still riding away from me, humiliation had already turned into evidence. Mason had the hotel room ready before I reached the elevator, with my second laptop charging on the desk, clean clothes on the chair, and a folder already opened. Dana Whitaker was waiting on video with the forensic consultant beside her, and neither of them wasted time pretending the airport mattered more than the paper trail. Dana told me the recording was clean. The timing was useful. And what mattered now was attaching Gavin's public punishment to the documents he thought I had never read. The consultant walked me through the structure slowly, using the actual packets on my screen instead of theory. And every page made the same ugly point. Gavin had been routing inflated vendor coordination fees through a shell company, while Tessa's scheduling emails and access logs made the billing look operational instead of staged. My name appeared where trust was needed most. On certification pages, renewal forms, and internal approval records. Because Gavin had understood from the beginning that my credibility traveled farther than his. Then Dana opened the packet that made my stomach go cold. A routine insurance and vendor renewal set Gavin had put in front of me 6 months earlier. Buried inside, it was language transferring management control of the East Austin studio my grandmother left me, and my signature sat there exactly where he needed it. Dana looked at the page, then back at me through the screen, and told me what I had already started to understand. The affair was humiliating, but the disorderly was the real theft. Dana filed before noon, moving fast and narrow, asking the court for immediate restraints on asset transfers, temporary use of the house, controlled debt payments, support, and forced financial disclosure. By the time I walked into the Travis County courtroom the next afternoon, Gavin was already there with a lawyer who looked expensive enough to project confidence and tired enough to know better. Dana opened with sequence instead of drama. The airport recording first, then the vendor packet mismatch, then the shell company billing trail, and finally the East Austin studio transfer. When Gavin's attorney tried to frame everything as a private marital conflict, Dana played his voice through the room, calm and unmistakable. Get out. Figure it out. This is what consequences feel like. Then she moved to the documents and tied my signature to the exact pages where trust had been borrowed, pointing to certification forms, approval records, and the renewal packet Gavin buried the studio language inside. Brooke Harlan appeared exactly when Dana needed scale instead of sympathy, confirming her foundation had received split invoices, inconsistent serial records, and vendor paperwork that put Tessa inside the operational chain. Gavin kept calling routine. Gavin made the mistake he always made when pressure hit him hard enough, which was believing he could talk over paper and make the room follow his version. He leaned forward and called me unstable, manipulative, vindictive, then said I had signed what I signed. And I looked at him and answered only this: you needed me to sign fast and stay small. The judge granted temporary relief from the bench, freezing movement around the disputed assets, giving me use of the house, opening temporary support, compelling records, and setting the studio aside for deeper review while Gavin sat there hearing. For the first time, a version of our marriage he could not interrupt. After the hearing, I did not chase anyone, post anything, or make myself the center of a public narrative Gavin would have known how to twist. Dana sent the orders where they needed to go. Brooke forwarded the records her foundation could lawfully release. And the rest moved the way it always does when paperwork starts reaching people who understand risk. Contract slowed. Calls were returned more carefully. And rooms that had once opened for Gavin on reputation alone began requiring explanations his voice could no longer provide. Tessa tried first to drift back into the safer role of outside contractor, but her own trail kept refusing her that exit. Her scheduling emails matched the invoice timing too closely. Her badge access logs placed her inside meetings Gavin had described as routine vendor administration, and the coordination fees tied to her work were too inflated to ignore. By the second week, people in that conference circuit were no longer asking whether she had known about me and Gavin. They were asking how far into the billing structure she had gone. Gavin answered pressure the way he always had, by attacking character first, then signatures, then time. And each tactic landed weaker than the one before. He called me unstable because the court had already heard the airport recording, called me complicit because Dana had already mapped where my name appeared, and tried delay because Brooke's records had already widened the room. I did not need to humiliate him socially, because the documents were doing something better. They were introducing him, piece by piece, to the people he had always counted on, never looking too closely. The court reviewed the renewal packet beside the surrounding emails. Timing, and approval trail, and the pattern mattered more than Gavin's excuses ever could. My signature was real, but the presentation was not, and that difference pulled the East Austin studio back out of the shell structure. Dana told me the transfer would not stand if the record kept holding, and by then the record was holding from every direction. Brooke sent her foundation's material through counsel instead of through gossip, which was exactly why the next phase opened the way it did. The split invoices, duplicated serial references, and staged coordination fees were no longer a marital story once other damaged accounts began aligning around the same paper trail. Dana kept the lines clean. Family court for possession, support, and disclosure. Outside authorities, for whatever the larger structure might become once reviewed. I did not exaggerate anything, because the documents were already saying enough in their own precise language, and that precision was what finally returned my footing. The studio came back first, as disputed property set aside from Gavin's reach. Then, as something I could stand inside without feeling tricked by my own name. By the time the federal door opened, it did not feel like revenge anymore, only the natural result of records landing where records were always supposed to go. I did not sell the East Austin studio after it came back to me, because by then I understood that keeping it mattered more than liquidating it. The rooms were small, the wiring needed work, and the front windows still carried the ghost marks of old lettering Gavin had tried to fold into his structure. I stood inside with the court papers in my bag and realized the first honest thing I wanted after survival was not escape, but use. So I kept it and built Ledger House slowly. Not as a grand gesture, but as a place where women could sit down with statements, debt language, tax mail, and their own names. Mason handled repairs when he could. Brooke connected me quietly to the first women who needed exactly that kind of room, and the work stayed practical. I wanted tables, locks, clean light, a printer that worked, and a front door no one had to flinch before opening. By the time the paint dried and the first files began landing on those tables, I understood something Gavin never had access to during our marriage. He had control over the version of me that rushed signatures, softened edges, and mistook silence for peace, but not the part that came back. When I unlocked Ledger House for the first time and heard myself think, "This is mine," it was not healing alone that filled the room, but authority. Thank you for staying with me through this story. And if any part of it felt close to your own life, I hope it left you steadier tonight. I hope you find the kind of love that does not ask you to become smaller. And I will see you in the next one.